So welcome everybody to tonight's session, which is a Q&A with our Champion Bets NRL analyst, Steve Green. My name's Mark Hayward from the Champion Bets office, and yeah, I'm going to just host tonight and just introduce Steve, and then then I'll shut up basically and let Steve answer all your questions. We've got quite a few questions that people have sent through beforehand, before the session. So we're going to run through them. But yeah, we're pretty keen for it to be it is a Q&A, so we're pretty keen for it to be interactive. So if any of you have any questions at all now or at any time throughout the session tonight, in your go-to webinar, in your control panel there, you should have a text box to send messages. So just send us one of the text messages. That's the easiest way to do it. We'll get Steve to answer it. We will answer all the questions. So yeah, as I said, we've got quite a few that have been sent beforehand, and yeah, anything you want to ask now, we'll answer as well. If for whatever reason we don't get to any of them, we'll do written answers when we put a replay of the webinar up tomorrow on the website. So yeah, look out for that. I just thought we'd start off with, we've got a few of Steve's members here who are a few people have been with him for a while, but a few people who haven't. So I thought we'd just start by just showing, I guess, giving everyone a quick idea of what Steve actually does with Champion Bets. So he is our in-house NRL analyst. He runs our major NRL service, the NRL tip service. That involves basically Steve's an expert analyst and punter on NRL and rugby league in general. And so his service runs throughout the season each year. He's been with Champion Bets for 4 seasons now. He surveys the NRL, the regular season, of course, and the finals right up to the grand final, state of origin. He also does post-season internationals, which, depending on the year, there can be quite a few other events after the season, internationals and that. So it also goes right through and covers all them. And what members get basically is, they should get full match previews of every game, whether we're betting on that game or not. I know a lot of members enjoy that. It's not just simply a list of bets you get each week. You get really in-depth previews from Steve on every game that you can read about. And yeah, even if we're not having a bet, Steve will let you know maybe which way he's leaning or what he's looking toward. Best bets each week, of course, you get them as well. So and that includes your selection for each week, your stake, the prices to take, and which bookies to bet with. So the majority of Steve's betting is on your major markets, so your head-to-heads and lines and your totals. But he also takes a position sometimes in other prop markets that are available on NRL. So it's a really big betting sport. I think it's second only to AFL in Australia. So there's a lot of markets available, and all the bookies obviously betting on it. So there's a lot of opportunities there. As I said, Steve's been with us for 4 seasons now with Champion Bets, and in that time we've just got a quick summary of his results here. He's been obviously really good. The overall profit's been 129 units profit at 9.5% POT, which has been really, which has been obviously a fantastic effort. But it's more, if you look at it through years, the big thing that you'll see obviously is the real consistency that he's been able to deliver year after year. His worst year, if you like, was 7.8% profit on turnover. So he's been really consistent all the way through, and actually last year had a record year, delivered 44 units of profit at 10.5% profit on turnover. I know if you speak to any serious or professional punter, to go at 10% POT over 4 years is extremely good, and it's a record that many punters would be extremely happy with. So at this point, I might just actually introduce Steve. He's on the line and the tech guides are with us. We'll be able to hear from him. So how are you, Steve?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for that wrap.
No worries. Yeah, good to have you on board. Yeah, as I said, we're just going to run through the questions that we get on. And yeah, if anyone's having any issues or, as I said, wants to ask a question, then just shoot us a question in the text box and we'll answer it for you. So just looking at these results, just quickly, Steve, one thing I did want to ask you was, if we look at your stakes, what you've turned over, that we can see that there was a slight step back in 2018, but it's actually increased quite a bit from 2016 through to 2019. To you really turned over a lot more last year. Is there any reason for that? Are you more confident, or is it just the way things have fallen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a few reasons. One is, if you're able to maintain a profit on turnover of 10%, then increasing your stake will just kind of generate more profits for members. So where possible, I tried to up my bets. So instead of two unit or 3 unit bets, if I really like something and my model suggested it was probably 6 points, 8 points out the line, I was going 4 units on a few occasions, or 3 units on the line and maybe 1 unit on the head-to-head if it was an underdog. So jagging a few of those really did not only bring in the profit but also up the stake. Members might remember also had a little bit of a crack at the end of the year on the internationals, and even had a bet on the women's NRL, and had a bit of success there. So sometimes just the nature of the years based on postseason action gives you more opportunities to up your stakes. So but yeah, and then I think also just confidence, just backing myself, that I think that I feel like I'm able to kind of grind out a 10% profit on turnover, hopefully even a bit better this year. And so where possible, just really make the bookmakers pay for their errors rather than rather than being conservative. Just open up the shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, we might actually just jump straight into the questions. We've already got one. Michael sent a question through, which was he's just asking, do you use Betfair to trade on the games? I assume he means perhaps before, but also in play. See a bit of a topical question given the Betfair situation on the NRL this year. They're not yet committed to fielding on it, but we think that'll get worked out, and they will eventually. But
Yeah,
do you use Betfair to trade in game?
Yes, I do. I really like Betfair, and I try and use them as much as possible. I don't tip using Betfair odds because obviously it is quite volatile, and it's sometimes the liquidity doesn't really justify tipping those prices. But personally, yeah, I trade on Betfair both pre-game and during the game, and fingers crossed that they do sort this out, because a lot of us who are heavily limited or totally banned from the other bookmakers rely on Betfair. So I've written a few passionate emails to the NRL to sort out this mess, and to understand the predicament that Betfair is in. But no, to answer that Michael's question, definitely use Betfair to trade on the run. I also just find they're quicker at taking bets. They really do treat it like a stock exchange, and I can place a bet in 15 seconds with them, where some of the other bookies ask you how your night is or something, and you just want to get your bet on the run. So yeah, really do like Betfair.
Yeah, sure. And just for those that aren't aware, the NRL at the end of last season looked to renegotiate all the deals they had with different bookmakers, and I think the deal they put to Betfair was, I think Betfair, in their words, was extremely unfair, and they thought it would cause them to either not put up NRL markets at all, or if they were to put up NRL markets, they'd have to charge a really high commission. So they've gone back to Betfair on that, and they're in negotiations. We're speaking to Betfair last week, and they've committed that they won't bet on NRL until they've got a deal signed, and they're in negotiations and hopeful that a fair deal will be signed for all. So fingers crossed that happens pretty quickly. So we might just move on with the questions that we have. Our first question was from Michael, but also so the first question that we've got from Nick was, with fantasy sports gaining in popularity and the stats being used heavily, what do you think your player rating model is able to continue to beat the market? Obviously, stats are a lot bigger part of the game than they used to be. So it feels like everyone's got access to stats. So how is your model still able to work, given it is obviously statistically based?
Yes, no, fantasy sports has been fantastic for the game, to be honest. I used to play in a competition with my mates and we loved it. I don't do it anymore just because I don't have time. I'd rather focus on betting and working for champion bets, and I just find fantasy a distraction for me, but I certainly understand why people love it. There's a few reasons. I mean, Supercoach and the other leagues, that they do basically, attach a price to players based on their statistical performance, which in essence is a player rating. I do think that they, just at a basic level, they're not always accurate. So, I could go through Supercoach now, and some of the prices that are being offered are laughable. They're often based on last season's form and the numbers, and that doesn't always kind of isn't a, past performance isn't always an indicative of future performance. So they're backwards looking. So a player may have had an injury, may have been given not much, a lot of bench time. There's lots of reasons why Supercoach prices are massively out. So in some ways, it's actually been fantastic because I think it fuels a bit of misinformation, and people kind of look at the prices on fantasy and think, oh, geez, how is this bloke Steve Green tipping the Titans at plus 12.5? Look at their pathetic Supercoach ratings. And it's like I said, it's if I'm looking at who's going to win the game, not who's going to accumulate the most offloads or not concede penalties, because just to give you a snippet, I mean, a penalty sometimes can actually be a very smart play. Some of the best players in the competition have given away lots of penalty, have topped the penalty count. So I've actually got it here, and it's blokes like Connor Watson, Ryan James, Curtis Sirenan, James Maloney, all give away a lot of penalties. Some of those were poor, but some of them were actually strategic penalties to slow down the other team's momentum. So Supercoach would penalise that. I'm a bit more nuanced with my approach. I collect aggregate data, but then I also do a bit of subjective analysis over the top to make sure I'm not just looking at data blindly. So and fundamentally, player ratings is the basis of my approach, but it's not everything. So I bring in and particularly last year, which is what part of the reason I upped my stakes, because I started getting a lot more confident with how I was predicting things. I also look at team momentum, team dynamics, team defensive performances. None of that's captured with player ratings on Supercoach. So you could plug in Supercoach player dollar values, and you'd probably have a better approach than what some mugs do just by guessing, but it's not the whole picture. So yeah, fantasy sports has been great. Drives a lot of attention to the sport. It actually drives a lot of betting because it's a natural kind of jump from fantasy to betting. But yeah, it's not. We're not at a point yet in Australia where the fantasy does really take away the pro gambler's edge. I think America's probably getting closer to that point after years and years of fantasy sports and really high dollar stakes as well. It's still very much an amateur mates versus mates. But I have noticed on Twitter quite a few keen eyes using Supercoach as a platform for their analysis. So there's no doubt it's heading in the right direction. But I still think I'm able to beat the market based on my approach.
Great. We'll move on. We actually had a second question from Nick, which was pretty straightforward one. In general, what are the biggest mistakes that bookies make when it comes to the NRL?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I'd say that they make a lot of mistakes, and there's a reason why they make a lot of mistakes nowadays. Well, they always have, and basically because they have this model where they ban winning punters, the sports bet model as I call it, which other bookies have taken on with gusto. They are actually taking away what in economics is called price discovery. So smarter punters paying the prices into shape because they spot prices that are out of whack. And if you ban the sharp punters, then what they are doing is stopping the price moving. So I do a lot of analysis at the end of a season as to how far the bookies were off per game. So look at the median line difference. So, on average, let's just say it is about this. They're wrong by about 10 to 12 points on average. Sorry, on median. And I look at the median because I don't want to get the numbers swayed by those 40, 50 point losses. So they're making mistakes because they don't need to be as sharp as they should be, because basically, once they identify a winning punter, they restrict you and eventually probably ban you. So that's one reason they're making mistakes. I think bookmakers in Australia with rugby league, because I used to work for bookmakers, that they really just don't. It's In all due respect, they take an amateur approach to pricing up games. It is kind of, I think it's getting better. It's a lot more data driven, but it used to be very subjective and very kind of throw up a price and just see what happens. And like I said, because there's no smart punters banging them into shape, the prices stay wrong. So I'd also say the bookies follow, because they don't have a scientific approach. A lot of the time they get caught up in some of the media hype around players and teams, and they can sometimes get caught up in a false narrative over how good a team's going or how bad a team's going, and so just in simple terms, a lack of professionalism. They don't move lines enough too. Like in American sports, I used to work for an American sports bookmaker, which is why I often refer to American sports. Many years ago now, but the lines would, if Michael Jordan or that shows my age, Kobe Bryant, or someone like that was out, the line would just get hammered. Where in rugby league, Jonathan Thurston used to get out and then move 2 or 3 points. Should have moved 6, 8 points. He was such a pivotal part of that team. So that's one thing they don't do, is they don't react enough when something does change. Especially with player outs or with weather, the total points gets bumped down a couple of points when it rains. It really, the data's there. It should be 6 points lower, 4 points lower at least, if there's a heavy downpour on certain tracks. So that just comes down to really a lack of professionalism in a nutshell. But that's just some of the mistakes they make.
So sorry, were you saying before that the median that bookmakers are out by on each game is 10 to 12 points?
Yep.
Yeah, seems like a high number.
It sounds like a very high number. That's why I still think there's there's a lot of profit to be made on betting on rugby league. I haven't had the time or inclination to do it for the NFL or NBA, but I have read into it, and I think you're looking at, NBA is a bit of an unfair comparison because the scores are a fair bit higher, but the NFL is probably a reasonable comparison. The scores a little bit higher, but I think it's closer to 6 points there, the median. So it just shows that, that with any market, that, the thinner the market. I mean, with the WNRL, I haven't done it yet because the season's shorter and it's coming towards the end of the year. But I reckon they'd be at probably 15 points with that, because it's a thinner market and there's less money banging the price into shape over time. So, that's closing line too. But the difference between closing line and opening line in NRL is very minimal. It moves about, I think, 0.2. 0.2 of a point on average. So, most lines, what they put up, it stays like that. So, where, like I said, in the NBA and NFL, the smart money really moves the line quite a bit. So it's just an inefficient, stagnant market. And if you've got an edge and you can get on, there's money to be made in rugby league.
Sure. Okay, we'll move on to the next question that we had. That was from Frank, and pretty basic one. Do you usually bet on head to head or at the line?
I try to do both. I think my model is geared towards generating lines. So you'll often find me betting on a line. I will venture into head-to-heads in certain circumstances with certain teams. I used to probably be reluctant to back underdogs at the head-to-head, just because it does probably produce more volatile results. because you're backing a $4 shot. You're not expecting to win all the time, not even 50% really. So when you're tipping for a living, you know that your punters want to see results. So I think I used to stray towards taking the safer option and betting on the line, but no, I now realise that I feel like my track record's good enough that the members will give me a bit of patience and wait for those results to come in on the head-to-head underdog. So in a nutshell, line probably is the dominant bet that I make, but I've started betting a lot more on head-to-head, and in some ways I'm probably going to start betting more and more on head-to-head, because I actually think just getting stung with those kind of consolation tries when you've backed minus 12.5 shots and they've been up by 24 with 5 minutes left and they've conceded 2 converted tries and you haven't covered. Those guys, sorry, that wouldn't matter whether you're betting line or head, but there are instances where the team's clearly just trying to win, not trying to cover a line, and so they kind of just concede late points and cost you. So sometimes betting the head-to-head is a bit more good for your sanity, but yeah, I try to do both, to be honest. There's no reason on most games to not have a crack at both.
Yeah, sure. I've just for David there, I've just seen your question come through. We've actually, regarding Latrell Mitchell, we've actually got another question on Latrell Mitchell, so I'll ask that just after this one, which was, can the Roosters replace Latrell Mitchell? If so, how?
I think they can. I think the problem was they were going to replace him with Billy Smith, and Billy Smith got injured and is out for the season. So the question is, he was fantastic in New South Wales Cup. That's one thing I do, is watch a lot of Queensland and New South Wales Cup, and I'm actually looking at having a bit more of potentially a bet on those leagues this year. So in addition to all those markets that Mark outlined at the beginning, they may actually be a bit more action this year on those leagues. I'll have a look at what kind of action you can get on. But so Billy Smith was going to be fantastic. That's probably why they let him go, to be honest, because they knew they had a ready-made replacement. The question is now what they do. I think Angus Crichton probably will move there, because I actually think they weren't getting the most out of him as a back rower / reserve back rower. So moving him into the centres really does, I think, bolster their starting 13. So yeah, I think Latrell Mitchell was fantastic, but I definitely don't think he was worth probably what he was asking as a centre, definitely. And because Tedesco's there at fullback, he was never going to play fullback, and the Kiri at 5'8", he was never going to play 5'8". So I think centres are probably the one position it's actually quite easy to cover, because nowadays a really good winger can shift into the centre, or a back rower can shift out there. So I don't see that being a massive issue for them this year.
Yeah, we might just follow up with David's question that he's just sent in, which was, do you see the value added by Latrell Mitchell outweighing the loss of Sam Burgess on a line?
So sorry, was that Latrell Mitchell? Okay, for South. Sorry.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah. No, I get that. That's an interesting one. I think that they're very different players. So and Souths have had quite a few kind of significant player movements, and I think over the last few years, James Roberts kind of, I mean, South's backline is absolutely deadly, and I use the deadly intentionally because it's got a heavy Indigenous flavour right through it. They really are going to be lethal in attack. I mean, there's some of the best Indigenous players in the league are lining up for the South's backline. Their forward pack is going to miss Sam Burgess, no doubt about it. But his last season, he really was struggling. His penalties were just very costly, made too many errors. So yeah, basically the question, I think Latrell Mitchell will definitely make their backline better. South, I mean, it really is probably as good a backline as in the competition. And I actually think South's forward pack's heavily underrated. They've picked up Patrick Mago, they've picked up Hame Sele. They already had a few underrated, Clinton Knight and a few guys who I think are really good players. So I actually think they won't miss Sam Burgess as much player-wise. They probably miss him a little leadership and his aggression. He had a real intimidation factor, but no, I think Souths will be okay in 2020. I'm having a good look at them at the moment, and very keen to see how they go in the Charity Shield Saturday night.
Sure. So our next question is Jason, probably a Queenslander, I guess. How do you see the Broncos going this year?
The Broncos, yeah. I mean, last year was a good year, but didn't start too well, to be honest. And one of the reasons was I think I had a lot of misguided faith that the Broncos were due for a bumpy year. I just thought that forward pack looked like it was going to tear everyone up to pieces. I think Payne Haas is a once in a generation player. I think he's probably the best player in the competition. It's him and Tedesco, maybe neck and neck. They're different positions, so it's hard to compare. But yeah, he's just a machine, and I really do like Brodie Croft's recruitment. He hasn't looked amazing to date, but I think in time, him and Milford could really form a great combo. I like the talk about Jack Bird at fullback. I think Jack Bird's a really good player, and I think he copped a lot of flack last year before his injury. I think he was playing great, and so I think with a full pre-season under his belt, him at fullback, Croft and Milford in the halves, and they'll probably go with Turpin starting at 9 just because of his enthusiasm and energy. But even if he doesn't start, McCulloch with a bit of pressure on him for once could actually lift and show why he was regarded as such a good player. So I think they've got the makings of a good spine. That some of their Queensland Cup players coming through out wide, Farnworth and they've got Xavier Coates, who's a massive talent out wide. So really exciting times for Broncos fans, I think. Big setback with losing Matt Lodge. He was in the preseason. He's the rock of that forward pack. Haas and Fafita are the superstars, but Matt Lodge is the one that scares the other opponents. So I'll be interested to see who steps up into that enforcer role. Payne Haas isn't an enforcer. He's an athlete that just gets the job done. So someone's going to have to come out and really fire that team up, and that's yet to be seen because I know Flegler and a few other guys are also young. So young forward pack who really need to step up in the hard part of the game. But no, I have them right up there this year in terms of potential. But it's very volatile. They could really finish anywhere, 13, 14 as low as that, or they could, make it to the grand final. They're probably a team that has the biggest range out of all the teams. I often look at range. People who say, "Oh, I think Broncos are going to come eighth." Well, you don't think they're going to come eighth. You think they're probably going to come between 6th and 10th, but you just come up with one number in the middle. So their range, but is very wide. So sorry to give you a bit of a fuzzy answer there, but that's the truth of the matter. How their forward pack fires up will be big. How Croft and Turpin go will be big. But if they look good early, I'm going to back them quite a bit. I think they could really pace some teams up in Brisbane once when a young team gets going and they start winning, they can win well. So there could be some bets at the line on them. I think if they're playing well.
Yeah, I was just looking as we were speaking. So at the moment, they're $1.85 to make the 8, $4 for the top 4, and $16 for the premiership. Just I guess without notice, much value there in your opinion?
Yeah, I think there's slight value there, but I think you could probably get away with watching. I think their first game's against the Cowboys up in North Queensland, which will be a blockbuster, and the Cowboys look pretty good this year. So if they lose that one, and the price might drift a little bit, and that might actually be the time to get on them. I often do try and anticipate when a team's price might blow out, and but if they win that one and they look really good, then they could shorten really quickly. So I wouldn't be jumping on right now because I just think the Matt Lodge injury will be is a big question mark over the pack. I mean, I'm a former front rower, so maybe I'm being biased here, but I know what it's like. I think a big mean front rower that really intimidates the other team. That's something which, talking about super coach and stats, you just can't pick that up with looking at the data. It's something, and the Cowboys have some really big front rowers, tough forward pack. So if the Broncos stand up to them and get the job done, well, the sky's the limit. Where if they cave, that they could be in trouble. So yeah, at the moment, I wouldn't be getting on that. I think there are better opportunities with some of the other teams that are out there.
Were you an intimidating front rower in your day, Steve?
I actually wasn't, to be honest. I wish I was a bit tough. I was probably more, probably focused more on the skill side of things. I didn't mind popping an offload, and probably playing the more fun style of footy. But that's probably why I respected the meatheads who would just get in there and absolutely smash someone, because I didn't want to do that. I like setting up the tries and the glamour play. So. But yeah, it's funny how little lessons from when you did play still come through all the way into the professional level. I mean, just an example, when a dummy half who's a really good defender is ruled out, I often look at back in the other team, because I just know that hole is so hard to plug. A hooker that makes 50 tackles in the middle of the ruck is close to irreplaceable, and they can bring up the under 20s guy who's rated very highly, but he hasn't tackled for 80 minutes in first grade ever, and you see them after 20 minutes just what has hit me kind of thing. So that's something that I learned from playing the game, and once again, you probably won't pick up with the stats, but yeah, so there are little things that I still draw on from my playing days, which is a long time ago, and I was no superstar by any means, but I certainly studied the game while I was playing, probably too much sometimes, but yeah, I liked some of those lessons have done me well.
Okay, so next question we got from Steve, another Steve. It's about Valentine Holmes, who's back from the NFL. Will he pick up where he left off, or do you think he'll have a season of transition?
I thought he was going to struggle, to be honest, but he looked really good in the trial. And I've thought about it a bit more, and actually gone back and watched some of his last season at Cronulla, and he was just sensational. And he's an athletic freak. I mean, that was why he went to the NFL, was because he was so athletic. He was so skillful, strong, fast. So he has all the makings of a great fullback. For some reason, I on my numbers, he's good, but I did think the Cowboys probably paid a little bit overs for him. They had Scott Drinkwater, who I'm a massive fan of, who they picked up on the cheap. And I mean, I'm often looking at a kind of Moneyball approach to team rosters, and it just didn't make sense to purchase for me. They had a good fullback cheap, but now they're looking at moving Drinkwater to 5/8 potentially, with Morgan at halfback, and maybe Reece Robson, who they picked up from the Dragons at hooker, and who I rate highly. So if that can work with Holmes at the back, that could actually be a really underrated spine. A lot of pace, really good attacking players. So the Cowboys have some real talent. I like the recruitment. I like Esau Masters. I think he provides them with some strike power. So Holmes is going to have plenty of opportunities. They won the Nines, that kind of showed and without Holmes playing, that just showed how much, and Morgan, without Morgan playing. So they've got the firepower. Whether he's going to take a look, he hasn't played a lot of fullback before going to the NFL. It was really, he got moved to fullback, and then he decided to up stumps and go to the NFL after winning the premiership. So he's not tried and tested over many seasons like a Tedesco or Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. So I don't think he deserves to be in that echelon just yet. But once again, it's one of those things which I know is a bit of a cop out, but this is just an honest answer. You kind of have to wait and see the first few games. Something I kind of pride myself on is being quick to kind of react. So we'll know after 20 minutes really in their first game, I think, whether he's cut out for this, and whether he's done the hard yards in the preseason. And so if I had to say, I think he'll be a dominant player. I don't think it'll be a transition year and he'll get moved to the wing or anything. But yeah, whether he can whether he can kind of be a Tedesco, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck quality player, I'm just not quite sold on yet.
Phil, we had another question from Steve as well, which I thought was quite an interesting one, because in previous years in particular, there's been quite a bit of rotation of coaches. And his question was, now that you've been doing it for a few years, are there certain coaches you prefer to back over others, and how do you allow for coaches in your ratings?
Yeah, I mean, once again, ratings, data. You can look at win-loss records and of coaches and so forth, but I think that can be a bit too blunt of an instrument to rate a coach. I think there are, you know, certain stages in a coach's career they may be kind of, basically out of form. I do think coaches get in and out of form, and sometimes they reinvent themselves, and the good coaches consistently reinvent themselves, like a Wayne Bennett or Craig Bellamy. I mean, Craig Bellamy's been doing the same thing for the whole time he's been there, but it just works time after time. I think it's important to not only look at the head coach, but also the coaching staff. I think, nowadays they really are a coaching team. So, for instance, the Dragons have recruited ex-Sharks disgraced coach Shane Flanagan, who was banned from the NRL, deregistered, but he's been allowed back in after serving a little bit of time. Not enough, according to some people, but for all his faults and his tactics, he's clearly a very effective coach. And already I've seen enough from the Dragons this year to think that they might be getting back to where they were a few years ago, which was, towards the benchmark of the comp. I think they had a real rough ruggedness in their defence of the Nines. And they looked really good on the trial on the weekend. Just looked like a different team. So, yeah, it is a subjective thing. It really is, reading the game and reading the tactics. I think I assess coaches very much on their player selection. So when I've got a player rating model that says that X player should be there and he's naming Y player and Y player stuffs up and then he keeps putting Y player there, that can make me kind of think, wait a minute, this coach, what's he doing? Like, why isn't he looking at the data I'm looking at? Why isn't he watching the videos that I'm watching? Is he playing favourites? Has he lost the dressing room? You can. I do a lot of hunting around to see if there's any not gossip, because there's a lot of bullshit gossip in the NRL, and you've got to look past that. But just some of that analysis does help just to understand what's going on at a club. So yeah, I do look at coaches, and there are coaches that I think are really good at getting certain results out of players and our squads, but it's a season by season thing. So at the moment, St George fans are screaming for Coach McGregor to get sacked because of their last few years of underperforming. But they might be 5 from 5. 5 wins from five games, and those people will quickly shut up as they have in the past. So it's a year by year proposition. I wouldn't go in backing Melbourne Storm because Craig Bellamy's a great coach. It's more than that. If he was a great coach, potentially because he had Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk, and Cameron Smith and Greg Inglis all on the one team for many years. So maybe there are other factors there as to why they were winning. But Bellamy's it's not the best example because he is just a freak. He can turn a lot of players, and he's probably I think the best coach of the last 20 years. Although Trent Robinson's making a big run for that now with back-to-back premierships, and so yeah, I certainly bet against bad coaches. So when I know that a coach is just lost the dressing room, poor strategy. So Garth Brennan last year, before he was sacked, it was just clear that he was floundering. He was trying silly things, playing Cartwright and Peachy next to each other in defence, despite missing tons of tackles. It was just really amateur stuff. So yeah, I can bet against coaches, but it doesn't factor into my ratings. It's more of something I look at over the top of once I pump out my number as to whether there's any coaching issues that should sway my bet.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, is there any coaches in particular that in your opinion you really admire, and perhaps any that are perhaps not quite as obvious that obviously that everyone rates, but is there any that you rate specifically?
Yeah, I think the most underrated coach right now would have to be Brad Arthur, in my view. So the Parramatta coach. There's some legends coaching at the moment. You got Des Hasler, been around the block. You got Wayne Bennett, Craig Bellamy. You got some really big guns up there. Trent Robinson's making a name for himself. Michael Maguire's back in the. They're considered the big gun coaches of the NRL. Brad Arthur's probably, and this is an example. Parramatta fans were screaming to get rid of him after some poor results. And I really liked the team that he assembled last year, and I kind of knew that they were destined for finals, and we got on them to make the 8. And part of that was because I just thought Brad Arthur's teams they're really well conditioned. He's clearly a fitness freak. He looks quite fit himself, to be honest, but they're always well conditioned. They've always got a hard edge to them, which is something I look for. and I really, I liked his recruitment. I thought he picked up players that from other clubs that they shouldn't have let go. So yeah, if I had to single out one coach, probably it's Brad Arthur, as someone who I really rate and think that gets the best out of his team, and he could. I think he'll finally get the praise he deserves in 2020.
Sure. Okay. Next question's from Matt, and that was, so from week to week, how do you adjust for team changes? Do you have player ratings and you just subtract that player's rating from the team and add in his replacement's rating, or is there further adjustments to the team chances as a whole? Pretty interesting question, I think, because it's sort of asked the question in a team sport: is the team purely just the sum of its parts, or are there players there that have a greater impact across their teammates?
Yeah, no, definitely, very good question, and one of the one of those questions that's so good that I kind of don't want to give away too much, because it's taken me years to kind of work out this relationship between, and I think I gave some insight earlier about the dummy half role. So the dummy half is one position that's very hard to accurately rate using statistics. There's a lot that the dummy half does with service, with drawing the markers, with just there's no stats that measure those things. So and because they have their hands on the ball more than any other player. When a dummy half is out, they might slot in someone who's a second rower who has a certain rating on my system, but that rating has been accumulated as a back rower, and you're asking him to play in a totally different position. So it certainly isn't. I'm very conscious of that dynamic and thinking about, how central is this player, how much can the replacement actually slot in and do that job. So no, in a nutshell, it certainly is more complex and nuanced than just kind of adding in another number and seeing what gets spat out. For some positions, but it is really like that, to be honest. And once again, I was a forward, so I can say this, but forwards generally have a pretty set, clear job, and their position, their contributions are relatively clearly measured. And it's similar with maybe centres and wingers to some extent. It's really the spine where I think the pure subbing in a player and subbing in the numbers doesn't work, and that's where you can, when a spine player is out, and sorry for those who don't know the terminology, fullback, 5/8, halfback, or a dummy half as a spine is considered the spine in rugby league, because they're key positions in the centre of the field, control of the play. That's where you really do, I think, find some betting opportunities. So, I hate to say it, I actually love a few injuries because it creates uncertainty and makes the bookmakers have to adjust how they've been doing things. And that's where sometimes they'll either overreact by, moving the line too much between weeks because the halfback's out, without realising that, the guy who they brought up from reserve grade is actually a very good halfback and will be able to cover the job. Or they've moved the back rower to the 5/8 and he's actually quite a good 5/8. He's played a lot of it in his junior football or something, So yeah, it's when team changes are actually fantastic. I really do like it, and I use, having a stats basis is really helpful, particularly the Queensland New South Wales Cup players that are coming up, because I'm aware when they're actually a gun. And it doesn't, sometimes it takes the commentators half an hour into the game to go, oh, gee, this kid can play, and you're like, well, yes, he won New South Wales Player of the Cup last year. Your job's
Do
a
your
full-time.
research.
Do your research. I mean, who is this guy? Yeah, he's been the best player in New South Wales Cup for 2 years. So yeah, so those kind of team changes are actually really good opportunities. But hopefully that's given enough answer without giving away too much.
Yeah, so almost seems like there is a touch of the old saying that the great players do what they do, but they also can have so much impact on the players around them by making them better as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there is. I think sometimes, and as rugby league gets more professional, that the perception that, oh no, once that player's out, they always lose. I mean, you often hear stats of,
Mm.
without Tedesco, the Roosters lose 60% of the time. With him, they win 70% of the time. And that probably is correct, and it probably is very telling because he's such a brilliant player. But sometimes you've got to dig a bit deeper and say, well, wait a minute, when they've lost without him, half of those times have been Origin affected weeks where they've actually also been missing 4 of their other stars. So those numbers are skewed in saying, it actually overstates his relative importance, because it's not just about Tedesco being out, it's because they're also missing Latrell Mitchell, Angus Crichton, 4 other stars or whatever. So sometimes people maybe get a little bit too focused on, oh, he's a key player, and when he's out, there's actually, the data can be a bit more murky. And once again, those kind of opportunities are where I'd like to think I shine, because I don't just take the simplistic approach. And that can sometimes be, something I try and do is think about where the herd, or where the market's gone wrong. What's the narrative here? What are they thinking has happened, and why is the price moving, or why the odds are the way they are? And is that correct? Is that based on correct data and a proper analysis? So in some ways, I would take a bit of a contrarian position there and say that yes, there are key players, of course, but sometimes you'd be surprised that good coaches can actually say, no, we're going to play a different style of footy. We'll play it down the right side now because we can't use our left side because what's his name's out, and that can actually work. They can get it done. So there can be value there.
Sure, I might just throw one in too that David's actually just sent through another question. Just on betting, and a common question we get, and it's certainly not limited to rugby league, but that's if bookmakers are limiting winning punters and not going down the price discovery route, what are some ways that you're able to get your bets on, apart from Top Sport?
Yeah, Top Sport, obviously Betfair. I mean, I have a view that and I think it's a real tragedy that Betfair doesn't have more liquidity. I mean, I just tell everyone I meet about Betfair. I just kind of, and mates of mine who still don't use Betfair, I just don't get it. Betfair, if they get up and running, means you can still get on. The bookies that I've been banned from, I just have to kind of let it ride, and it does hurt to sometimes see the crazy prices they've got on offer. There are other things you can do, which I won't don't have to explain too much, but you can get a mate to put a bet on for you here and there. But tipping, that's something which I think, like I said, because the prices aren't getting beat into shape, it means that the tipping service can actually be quite a really good service, because I'm not able to get on some of these prices, but if I tell other people to get on and they make money, then that can be at least beneficial to me by offering a service. So that's kind of how I've ended up here. Looking forward is to think, well, that there'll be a day when I can't get a bet on any corporate bookmakers. I'm not quite there yet. When the smart ones realise you're better off limiting me moving and not getting hit by 50 other people down the track somewhere. So I always make sure when I tip that there's a few bookmakers offering the price so that members can get on, and I don't tip in the really thin markets. There might be some exotic bet where there's no use tipping it, because once 2 or 3 people get on, they're going to move the price. But it's a concern, and that's why I'm sweating on Betfair getting back up and running, and really hoping that they get the action and liquidity that we need to keep having a bet.
Sure, and just on that question for David, as I said, it's a question we get a lot, and there's quite a bit of material on the website about getting bets on and having your accounts limited at bookmakers. So make sure you have a look on the site, and if you've got any further questions or wanted any further info, then just shoot us an email or get in touch, and we'll put your questions to a few of the other guys and see what else they come up with. So we'll just move on to a question we had from Jimmy, which was, again, I thought quite an interesting question, which was, can you put a percentage on how much your judgment is purely numbers or stats, and how much of it is feel for the game? I think a lot of the listeners will probably know you quite well and be familiar with your approach, but for those who aren't, Steve's obviously very stats heavy in his approach, but I can tell you without doubt that he is also an absolute rugby league nut. So there's obviously a little bit of judgment in there as well. So yeah, you're able to sort of, is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? You able to put a number on that?
Yeah, I think I will put a number on it, but I'll just kind of explain how I kind of got here. So, I mean, I used to bet obviously purely on judgment, and then that was kind of what twigged me when I saw how much data was being used in America, that I had to start using data. I started probably using it too much, I think, and I had some kind of bizarre. This is before I was tipping for champion bets a long time ago, and I was just betting myself. Bizarre tips where I was like, why? I've got a team 7-point favorites, and they're actually 6-point underdogs. It's just so out that it's crazy. And then I wouldn't win, and the bookies were right. So I started thinking, wait a minute, one, the model's not working, but two, maybe I've got to use a bit of, because I knew that was wrong. I kind of didn't think that made sense. So I think now I've probably gotten to a point where I'm probably more maybe 60-70% data, and maybe 30-40% judgment. I think as 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 the season progresses, I probably get a little bit more database, because I have more data for that season. So, right now I've got, years of data, and I've got player ratings ready to go, but a lot changes in the off season. So I, that's those, I watched the trial games, I watched the first rounds really closely, because I think that's where there's actually, and my record I think shows this, that often, although last year, which was my best year, I didn't start well, but in previous years I really started well, because I do apply a bit of judgment. So I think that I read the game quite well and think, no, this is how the game's changed. So there's rule changes. There's lots of things that change. If you just went in with a pure data approach, it I think would lead you astray. So, but I always make sure that I call it an anchor. Like, so data is my kind of anchor. So that I don't get caught up in the hype about a player, and I don't miss the underrated players coming through. But yeah, if I had to put a number, I'd say 60%, 65% maybe in and 30-35% judgment. And I think I've explained in some of my previous questions the kind of judgment I'm talking about there, about in various ways that does that judgment come in. But I trust the data. I never kind of now that I've got the model where it is, if I'm saying it's wrong, I don't say, oh, but everyone mates were saying this, and the commentators on Fox were saying that. I do not care about being the only person in the room that thinks something, and I think that's probably one of my strengths, is a bit of independent thought. So yeah, I back my judgment, use my data as an anchor, and I back my judgment to be applied where necessary.
Okay, and the actually the last question we had submitted before tonight's show was another one from Jimmy, and yeah, pretty simple one. And have you betted anything else with success, or has it only been rugby league?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I as you said, Mark, I'm a rugby league nut, and I actually think being a rugby league nut and only betting on rugby league is actually really important. I know a lot of people that follow the NBA in the off season. I'm not saying good luck to them, and I'm probably the weirdo just liking rugby league. But when they're watching NBA or cricket, I'm collecting the data from the last season, and when the pre-season, when they're still watching the tennis or whatever, I'm kind of watching the trials and watching things that I think give me that extra edge. So I don't bet on any other sport, but rugby league, and I'm talking like, because I don't like losing money. Once you kind of win money betting, and you have a certain amount that you can dedicate towards your bankroll, then it's like any stupid bet, going to the races or something and just fluttering away a few hundred. It's like, well, that's stupid. I could have turned that. Who knows what I could have turned that into if I put it on what I'm good at. So I'm not a. It sounds like I'm a wet blanket. I don't mind, having a bit of fun with the mates or whatever. But I bet on rugby league, and that's it, sport wise. But I actually do a bit of, and I'm doing it more often now, a little bit of financial trading. So I studied a little bit of economics, and I'm very interested in finance markets, and so interest rates and stuff like that. It actually gives me, I think, a good understanding of how markets work, and you know, when to hedge, when not to hedge, how to hedge well. You know, there's a lot of skills that you can learn from the financial markets and apply them to betting, and I think make yourself a more profitable punter. Because you know, I think I've always had the rugby league knowledge and the stats and stuff, but as I've matured and gotten wiser, I've learned that I could have been maximizing my profits and optimizing my results by doing certain things differently. So yeah, economics and finances. I wouldn't say, yeah, no, it's betting. Some of them are straight up bets. You know, Betfair offer some good markets on financial markets, and so do some of the other corporates. Although they really do cut you off. I've been cut off from pretty much all of them on interest rate bets because I picked a bit of a ripper last year. But yeah, so those kind of markets are the only thing I bet on. But yeah, like I said earlier, rugby league, not only NRL. You know, I've had a few bets on the English Super League, although I don't tip that because it's pretty hard to get a good bet on here. But yeah, Queensland Cup, New South Wales Cup, Women's League, State of Origin. There's enough to bet on in rugby league that you've got a lot of action without having to venture into other sports where I don't know as much about, don't know anything about compared to what I know about rugby league. So yeah, specialisation I think is a pretty big thing. I really admire people that can win across sports. But to be honest, I don't know too many of them. I think most of the pros that I know that are good have really honed in on a sport, and sometimes it's not even a sport; it's a market. They might be just total points, or they might be just you know, the line markets and don't touch anything else. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, and we've just had another question from David that he sent in. That was, do you see the new 2040 rule impacting totals this season?
Good question. I think at the nines there was only one. I remember the Dragons kicking one, and I didn't even think it was intentional. Maybe I got it wrong there. Sorry, the women's they might have had a 2040. Oh, I don't know. I know that for the men they did. It's interesting. I actually think it will be used a lot more than people predict because I think when you know when you're bogged down in your own area and you're just not going to get forward much, you know, in the next few tackles because you've got no momentum. So it's third tackle, you're 18 meters out. I think that's when it would really make sense to go for a 2040 because if you do it at a right angle, even if you don't get it, if you can find space, hit the grass, you'll be able to turn the other team around. And I think it's a really good defensive play to get out of the red zone. And you know, if it pulls off, and then as David's alluded, you're then attacking, and maybe it will open up opportunities for you for more points. But that's not too clear to me because there's also a chance that it becomes a more of a defensive tactic in the sense that you're kicking early, you're getting the ball down their end, and you're turning the game into more of a grind. So I don't think it. I think it'd be more interesting to see which teams are using it and potentially using it to good effect. So we saw last year with the Raiders, you know, they took on the stripping rule like unlike any other team, and it literally, you know, probably won them a game or two. They did it at such crucial times and close games. So if there are teams who have really good kickers, and you can kind of look at who's got the 40-20s to know who's probably going to get the 20-40s. And of course, I keep that data on as anyone can access that pretty easily. So that's something to look out for is, you know, who kicks 40-20s, will they kick 20-40s? And that will come from the coach. You know, that will come from a strategy to use it. They'll have a call that goes out. This is what we're doing. We're stuck. We need to get out of here. And potentially, you know, you could use it to bet on the run. You could use it to. It could impact totals, or it could just impact the actual odds of a game. It could be a real ace up a certain team's sleeve. So yeah, really good question there. There's you know, the rules is another reason why you just got to focus on. You can't just focus on what's happened previous years because I mean, I even just have read before we jumped online now that there is talk about them cracking down on the wrestle again, which, you know, everyone talks about little rule changes. The biggest rule change and the biggest determinant of a success is how that ruck is policed. And if there is a bit of a tightening up against wrestling and they try and crack down on it more like they should have and they were a few years ago, then teams like Melbourne, the Raiders, who wrestled a lot, last year. It's one of the reasons they made the grand final, because it's such an effective strategy, could struggle. And teams like Souths, who have Damien Cook at hooker and some electric outside backs, could really benefit. So there's a few rule changes which I'm going to be watching very closely, and the Charity Shield on Saturday night, which I'm going to post a preview for shortly. I think tomorrow we're going to put it up. That's something where you get to have a little bit of an insight, because there's also captain's challenge. So that's going to be a big change, where they can challenge a call on the run at certain points, at certain stoppages, and challenge a decision. How that's used at certain points in the game, whether that will have an impact on total points is yet to be seen. Whether it will be used strategically to stunt the team's momentum and therefore lower total points. There's lots of ifs there, but like I said, I don't have all the answers right now, because a lot of that depends on how teams utilize or practice these strategies. But I like to think I've proven to be pretty good at working out, once I've seen what's going on, how this is going to affect things and how the markets may have not reacted properly. So yeah, really good question there, and yeah, I'm interested to see as well.
Okay, great. Well, that's probably us for tonight. I think we're right on an hour, and we've got through our questions. So yeah, I guess first of all, thanks for your time tonight, Steve. And as I said, we had quite a few questions through, and yeah, thanks for taking the time to answer for them. Yeah, for everyone listening in, thanks for your attendance as well. We put these things on so that people can hopefully gain a bit of knowledge. So yeah, thanks for coming along, and also with the upcoming season, there's still some places left in Steve's service if you wanted to join. And yeah, for everyone who's attended tonight, we'll just keep an eye on your email inbox tomorrow, and we'll send something through, maybe a little bit of a deal, just to, if you're thinking about getting on board. As far as the Q&A goes, though, it doesn't stop here. The session's over, but yeah, if anyone had any questions at all for the guys in the Champion Bets office, or for any of the analysts or punters that work with Champion Bets, don't hesitate at all to get in touch. Just go to the website. There's the contact us page where you can send a message or send an email, or jump on the phones with the guys in the office on the phone. If you had any questions at all, yeah, I know a lot of the punters we work with, they really do see it. They're not just tipsters. They really are providing a service, and I know so many of them are more than happy to speak to the members and answer any questions they might have. So yeah, just finally, once again, thanks for your attendance tonight, and yeah, if you have any questions at all, yeah, just let us know. So wish you all the best for the 2020 NRL season, and we'll speak again soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Mark.